Welcome to the deep dive. We're here to sift through your sources, pull out the core insights you need. And today we're zeroing in on, well, a major European power, France. A country often seen as, the gold standard for that generous welfare state. But beneath the surface, there's significant turmoil, political instability, and a national debt that's climbed past a staggering $4 trillion.
Yeah, and what's really striking here is the scale, right? France isn't just another country with debt problems. It's Europe's second biggest economy. We're talking nearly a fifth of the entire Eurozone's output. So if France really stumbles financially, the shockwaves would be huge. It puts the whole single currency project at risk, potentially.
Okay, let's definitely unpack that. Our mission here is to understand how this admired French system ended up in what looks like a tightening financial spiral. We need to look at why this debt situation matters globally, and I think crucially how this kind of economic vulnerability we're seeing connects to decisions around national security, modernizing defenses.
Exactly. And the sources suggest the warning signs that's been flashing for quite some time. We're essentially talking about decades of, let's say, easier choices leading to a point where the only options left are politically radioactive.
So let's start with that foundation, the sort of French paradox, combining strong capitalism with this incredibly robust social safety net. We're talking free education, universal health care, really generous unemployment support, pensions. It became baked into the national identity.
But that identity, it always had a hidden cost. And here's the number that really defines the current crisis. Since 1974, France has spent more than it earned. 51 straight years. Deficits weren't an anomaly, they were the norm.
And the creation of the euro played a huge role, didn't it? It almost acted like a painkiller.
Absolutely. Joining the single currency pushed France's borrowing costs way down to historic lows. So politicians were shielded really from the immediate consequences of that overspending. They could just lean on cheap debt instead of making, difficult structural changes.
They sort of kicked the can down the road.
They did. Until they couldn't anymore. The underlying weakness was starkly exposed, first in the 2008 crisis, and then, decisively, by the pandemic. COVID shut down the economy, forced the government to pour hundreds of billions into bailouts, furlough schemes, and that's when debt just exploded, past 110% of GDP. For the first time since World War II, the country owed more than its entire annual economic output.
Wow. And the spending hasn't really slowed down since, has it? The current numbers are pretty eye-watering. France's deficit, its overspending, is running at about 6% of GDP.
Yeah, and just to put that in context for you, the EU limit is supposed to be 3%.
So they're double the limit.
Double the official limit. And think about this. Almost 57 cents of every single euro produced in France now goes into the public sector.
57 cents.
It signals that this isn't just a temporary blip. It's baked in. So much of that spending is locked into entitlements that are politically almost impossible to touch.
Okay, and this is where it gets really interesting, as you said, because the absolute core pressure point, the thing threatening to buckle the whole system, it seems to be pensions.
That's the crux of it. France spends 13% of its entire GDP on pensions. That translates to over 350 billion euros every year. It's a level of spending that's, almost unmatched in the developed world.
14% of GDP.
More than they spend on education, defense, and transport put together.
And it's not just the amount, right? It's the demographics that are piling on the pressure.
Exactly. The ratio of workers paying in versus retirees taking out is completely out of whack compared to how the system was designed.
So back in the 90s, I see here, it was roughly 5 workers for every 1 retiree.
Right, 5 to 1. Today, that's plummeted to just 3 workers for every retiree.
3 to 1.
And looking ahead, the projections are even starker. By 2050, nearly 1 in 3 people in France could be retired, almost 30% of the population. Plus, people are living longer. The average French citizen lives about 11 years longer now than 50 years ago.
Which means the system has to pay out benefit for an extra decade, roughly, that it was never really budgeted for.
Precisely. It wasn't designed for that longevity.
And this collision of fiscal pressure and demographics leads straight into what the sources call the reform trap. Like when President Macron tried what seemed like a modest change, just raising the retirement age from 62 to 64.
Yeah, modest compared to neighbors.
Right.
Germany, Italy, they're at 67.
Right. But moving to 64 in France, 3 million people hit the streets in protest in 2023.
Exactly. It highlights the trap. The political cost of actually fixing the pension system seems higher, in the short term at least, than the economic cost of letting it continue to spiral.
So what happened? Macron forced it through?
He did, using a specific constitutional tool to bypass a parliamentary vote. But the political price was immense. He lost his working majority in parliament, and that triggered extreme political instability. France has had, what, 5 different prime ministers since 2022? It just grinds major reforms to a halt.
Wow. So entitlement spending basically fuels political paralysis.
It can, yeah.
Yeah.
It makes necessary adjustments incredibly difficult.
Okay, let's shift to the global fallout then. The domino effect. Investors must be getting nervous.
They are. Confidence is clearly shaky. You see France's debt growing by something like 5,000 euros every single second. And the credit rating agencies have noticed. They've pushed France down to its lowest sovereign rating in modern history.
That's a huge shift psychologically. France used to be seen as, rock solid, one of Europe's safest borrowers.
Absolutely. Now, interest rates on French debt are climbing because investors are demanding more compensation for the perceived risk.
Which brings up an uncomfortable comparison. The Greece parallel. Is that fair?
Well, the sources point to one very specific and, yes, quite concerning metric: France's current 10-year government bond yield. It's hovering around 3.3%.
Okay.
That is, almost chillingly, the exact same level Greece was trading at back in 2010, right before its debt crisis properly exploded and borrowing costs went completely haywire.
That's not a comforting statistic.
It's not. But, and this is critical, we have to remember the sheer scale difference. If France, with its 3.3 trillion in debt, actually tips into a full-blown crisis, it's completely uncharted territory. France is 10 times bigger than Greece was. The Eurozone simply doesn't have a pre-written playbook for rescuing an economy of this size, this importance.
So the options become almost impossible.
Pretty much. Does the Eurozone try to mount a rescue? That would likely cause enormous political friction with more fiscally conservative members like Germany or the Netherlands. Or do they refuse and risk letting a founding pillar of the entire Euro project potentially collapse? Neither option is good.
And either way, France repeatedly missing those EU budget rules, a 3% deficit target, the 60% debt to GDP target, it just chips away at the credibility of the whole system, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. If the rules don't seem to apply consistently, especially to the big players, then, what's the point of having those rules? It undermines the whole structure.
Okay, so this paints a picture of significant fragility in a major European economy. But let's widen the lens slightly. This isn't happening in a vacuum. We see similar, though distinct, pressures elsewhere. The sources mention the U.S. national debt, for example, now topping $37 trillion.
Right. And look at the interest payments alone in the U.S. consuming 6% of GDP now. That's actually more than the entire U.S. defense budget.
More than defense spending just on interest.
Just on interest.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of deep financial weakness inevitably starts shaping strategic policy. When governments are this constrained financially, paying huge sums just on debt service, they simply can't afford the kind of sprawling old-style defense spending of the past. Budgets get tight, so security solutions have to become smarter, more efficient, more targeted.
Modernized.
Right, so economic stability, or the lack of it, gets tangled up with national security priorities. And it seems this environment of, let's call it global financial strain, is a key reason why securing critical infrastructure against new kinds of threats has become such a high priority. It's driving investment into next-gen tech. Exactly. And that's where you see things like advanced threat detection systems coming into play, like the Hexwave system from Liberty Defense Holdings that's mentioned in our sources. It's an example of where resources are being directed when money is tight towards these high-efficiency, high-tech solutions.
Okay, tell us about Hexwave. What makes it different?
Well, it's a walk-through portal, but it uses a combination of millimeter wave technology, similar to what's in airport body scanners now, but enhanced plus 3D imaging and artificial intelligence. The really critical piece is its ability to detect not just metal objects, but also non-metallic threats. Think plastic explosives, liquid threats, ceramic knives, even 3D printed weapons. Things traditional metal detectors would miss.
And those non-metallic threats are a growing concern, obviously.
A major concern. Plus, Hexwave is designed for speed and convenience. It can screen up to maybe 700 people an hour without them needing to take off coats, shoes, or empty their bags.
Impressive throughput. And this tech came out of MIT originally.
Yeah, developed initially at MIT's Lincoln Laboratory, which has a long history of developing advanced tech for national security. So it's got pedigree. And it's definitely caught the eye of U.S. government agencies. We're talking TSA, Department of Homeland Security, even places like Los Alamos National Lab.
And there's actual adoption happening, contracts being signed.
Yes. The sources highlight a recent sole source contract awarded by the TSA to Liberty Defense for an upgrade program called HDAIT. Now, Sole source is important terminology here. It generally implies the government believes this specific tech offers unique capabilities that meet their requirements, capabilities that other systems might not have.
So it suggests a level of confidence in its effectiveness for specific needs.
Right. And there's also a looming deadline driving demand. The TSA has a mandate kicking in April 2026, I believe. It requires U.S. airports to start screening employees for concealed threats, not just passengers.
Ah, okay. That's a big expansion of screening.
Huge. And that likely necessitates a major overhaul of security infrastructure at airports, potentially creating significant demand for this type of next-generation, fast, accurate detection technology that can handle non-metallic threats efficiently.
Okay, so let's try to pull these threads together. What does this all mean for you, our listener? We started with France, looking at this deep political and fiscal spiral, how a system built on a generous promise ran into the hard reality of demographics and perhaps political inertia. We've seen how that crisis in one major country could potentially destabilize, 20% of the Eurozone. It forces a global reckoning.
And if we connect the dots, I think there are two key takeaways here for you to consider. First, it really underscores that domestic crises in major economies are rarely, if ever, just domestic. The financial weakness in France, or even the debt situation in the U.S., it creates systemic risk that affects global partners. It ripples outwards. And second, it shows how rising financial vulnerability, these massive debts, forces a pivot in priorities. Nations become focused on getting more efficient, more targeted security. Modernizing defenses to protect critical infrastructure against these evolving threats becomes paramount, especially when budgets are tight.
So less about quantity, more about quality and specific capabilities.
Exactly. Precision and efficiency become key.
Which brings us to our final provocative thought for today, drawn straight from the sources. Given the sheer size of France, it's just too big, really, to be managed by the existing Eurozone bailout mechanisms and rules if things get dire, and the European Central Bank is eventually forced to step in and directly buy French government bonds to prevent a meltdown. Will that moment effectively signal the death of fiscal discipline within the Eurozone? Will it fundamentally and perhaps permanently alter the very foundation of the euro currency project itself?
A profound question.
Definitely something for you to think about until our next deep dive.